Remember, when I grew up, every actor talked posh. All plays and movies were about middle class or upper class things. You know, it was all bunties having a party, let's go up to London, and everyone was in tennis shorts and rackets. You don't survive 60 years in the moving picture business by being a saint, nor by letting every bloody fool walk over you. You survive by knowing when to hold your tongue, when to speak your mind, and exactly when to walk away. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Now, when people get to my age and look back over 6 decades in front of a camera, they're usually expected to trot out the usual drivel, aren't they? Oh, I loved everyone. Everyone was a delight. The craft was a joy. Rubbish. Absolute bloody rubbish. You don't survive 80-odd movies and 60 years in the film business without encountering a few absolute, unmitigated nightmare merchants. Acting is a marvelous job, mind you. It paid for my house, it paid for my wine, and it got a boy from Elephant and Castle out of the gutter. But to say I loved everyone I worked with would be a lie so big you could park a double-decker bus inside it. Tonight, I'm not going to talk about my Oscars, my dear friend Sean Connery, or Christopher Nolan making me look clever in my 80s. Tonight I'm going to talk about the 5 blokes who tested my patience so thoroughly that even now just thinking about them makes my back ache. Let's start with the loudest one, shall we? Now, in the 1960s there was this myth built up around British actors, the whole Hellraiser brigade. You had Peter O'Toole, Richard Burton, and of course Richard Harris. The press loved them because they were always smashing up hotel rooms and reciting Shakespeare while covered in their own vomit. In 1995, I did an interview where I simply stated a basic, observable fact. I said those blokes were drunks and that their drinking ultimately destroyed what could have been even greater careers. I didn't say it out of malice. I said it because I watched good men drown themselves in booze. Well, Richard Harris took this rather personally. He didn't just pick up the phone like a normal bloke. He wrote a blistering 3-page letter straight to the Sunday Times. In this grand literary masterpiece, Harris called me an over-fat, flatulent 62-year-old windbag. He said my acting was about as intimidating as Shirley Temple. He went on and on, throwing every multisyllabic insult his hungover brain could scrape together. Now, Richard was a very talented actor when he was sober enough to remember where the camera was pointing, but his entire persona was built on this exhausting theatrical bluster. He thought being an actor meant screaming at the sky, fighting doormen, and pretending to be a tortured poet. I came from a working-class London family. If you acted like that in a pub in Bermondsey, somebody hit you over the head with a stool. When reporters ran to me asking for a response to his 3-page tirade, I told them the truth. I didn't know Richard Harris well enough to have a proper feud with him. That made him even madder, of course. Men like Harris couldn't stand the idea that their grand, dramatic hatred was met with a shrug. He wanted a grand duel. I was busy working. He spent his life drowning in his own legend, while I was off making movies and banking the checks. I never hated him for his talent. I hated him for the sheer, relentless, blowhard vanity of it all. If Richard Harris was all noise, Alfred Hitchcock was the absolute opposite. He killed you with a cold, rotund silence. Back in 1972, Hitchcock was coming back to London to film Frenzy. He was a god, of course, the master of suspense. Every actor in town would have crawled through broken glass just to be seen in the background of a Hitchcock shot. He sent me the script for the lead role, a horrific, brutal serial killer who raped and strangled women with a necktie. I read it, and it made my skin crawl. It wasn't clever like Psycho or stylish like Rear Window. It was ugly, graphic violence against women. I have 2 daughters. I have a wife I adore. I looked at that script and thought, I can't do this. I don't want to put this kind of sickness out into the world, and I certainly don't want my name attached to it. So I did what I thought was the polite, professional thing. I turned him down. Now, you have to understand, nobody turned down Alfred Hitchcock. It was simply not done. His ego was the size of an iceberg, and I had just crashed right into it. He didn't yell. He didn't write a letter to the papers like Harris. No, Hitchcock chose a far more British, wonderfully petty form of revenge. We both ate at the same restaurant every single Friday night, Chaine's in Los Angeles. For years, we'd walked past each other's tables, exchanged pleasantries, shared a laugh. The very first Friday after I turned down Frenzy, I walked into Chaine's, saw Alfred sitting in his usual booth, and waved. He looked right through me. Not a blink, not a nod. It was as if I were made of cellophane. For the next several years, every single Friday night, we sat 20 feet apart. I would walk past his table, say, "Good evening, Hitch," and he would stare straight ahead at his shrimp cocktail as if I were a ghost haunting the establishment. He maintained that ice-cold silent treatment until the day he died. I respected his movies, but my God, I hated the petty, arrogant tyranny of a man who thought turning down a role was a crime against humanity. Now, if you want to talk about true, unadulterated madness on a movie set, we have to talk about Steven Seagal. In the early 90s, I made a film called On Deadly Ground. I took the job for two very simple reasons: money and Alaska. They paid me a fortune, and I'd never been to Alaska. What I didn't realize was that I was signing up to spend 3 months trapped in the freezing cold with a man who was utterly, hopelessly detached from reality. Steven wasn't just starring in the film, he was directing it. And directing to Steven Seagal meant walking around in fringe jackets, mumbling incoherently, and treating everyone on set like dirt. He had this bizarre habit of halting production for hours at a time. We'd be standing out in sub-zero temperatures, frostbite creeping up our trousers, while Steven sat in his heated trailer. When you asked why we weren't shooting, crew members would whisper that Steven was consulting the wind or balancing his inner energy fields. I'm a professional, you see. I turn up, I know my lines, I stand on the mark, and I do the job. I don't need to ask the breeze how to read a line of dialogue. The man was a complete, pompous nightmare. He walked around like a kung fu messiah, convinced he was making a cinematic masterpiece that would save the environment, while delivering lines with all the emotional depth of a damp cardboard box. The script was ludicrous, the working conditions were miserable, and his directorial vision was a complete catastrophe. When the film finally premiered, Steven walked up to me, puffing out his chest, looking for praise. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Steven, I really didn't think it would be anywhere near this good." He smiled, thinking I'd given him a compliment. He was too thick to realize I was telling him it was a total piece of shite, but that I'd expected it to be even worse. Working with him was 3 months of my life I'll never get back, and I hated every single second of it. People who know me know that I am almost impossible to anger on a film set. I was raised in the theatre and honed in British cinema. You learn to keep your head down, do the work, and stay calm. But on the set of The Last Valley in 1971, a director named James Clavell managed to do what no one else ever could. He made Michael Caine completely lose his temper. Clavell was a famous novelist, of course, wrote Shogun later on, but as a director, he was an absolute nightmare of stubbornness and inefficiency. We were shooting in the Austrian Alps, dealing with horrific weather, freezing mud, and massive logistics. Instead of being organized, Clavell was tyrannical, stubborn, and utterly condescending to the cast and crew. Day after day, he would change scenes on a whim, waste hours over meaningless details, and talk down to actors who had been in the business twice as long as he had. The tension built up for weeks. Then came the day he pushed me too far. I can't even remember the exact petty instruction he gave me. It was something about how I was holding a sword or stepping off a horse, but he said it with such quiet, arrogant contempt that something inside me simply snapped. I didn't just argue with him, I flew into a blind, red-hot rage. I stood in front of the entire crew and screamed at James Clavell until my throat was raw. I used words that would make a London dock worker blush. The entire set went dead quiet. Nobody had ever seen me lose control like that. Afterward, I went back to my trailer, shaking with anger, but mostly shaking with pure embarrassment. Losing your temper in public is a terrible thing. It's an intimate, ugly exposure of your own weakness. I hated Clavell, not just because he was a terrible director to work for, but because he broke my discipline. He dragged me down into his mud. That very night, I made a solemn vow to myself. I would never, ever let another director break my composure again. And I never did. But I never forgave Clavell for making me break it in the first place. Finally, we come to Otto Preminger. Now, Otto was legendary in Hollywood, but not for his kindness. He was a bully, plain and simple. He was famous for picking a target on set, usually a younger actor or someone he thought was vulnerable, and screaming at them until they broke down in tears. He thought terror was a form of directing. In 1967, I was cast in his film Hurry Sundown. Before we even started shooting, I knew his reputation. I decided right then and there that I wasn't going to be another victim of the Preminger screaming machine. On our very first day, before a single frame of film was shot, I walked into his office. Otto was sitting behind his big desk, looking like a Bond villain. I didn't sit down. I looked him in the eye and said, "Otto, I know how you work. You like to scream at people. I'm letting you know right now, if you shout at me once, just once, I will walk off this set, get on a plane back to London, and you will never see me again." The room was completely silent. Otto stared at me. He was so used to people cowering before him, begging for his approval, that he didn't know how to process a bloke from South London telling him to shove it before we'd even started. He sat there for 3 long seconds. Then slowly, a massive smile broke across his face. He leaned back and said, "Alfie, I would never shout at you." And you know what? He never did. He shouted at everyone else, screamed until he was red in the face, but whenever he turned to me, he was as sweet as pie. "Alfie, darling, was that all right for you?" Now, you might ask why I hate him if he treated me well. I hated him because I had to watch him torture everyone else. He was a sadistic, miserable tyrant who picked on people who couldn't fight back. I respected the fact that he backed down when I stood up to him, but I hated what he represented, the idea that power gives a man the right to treat human beings like dirt. So there you have it. 5 blokes who made my life a bloody nightmare at one point or another. The movie business is a strange old game, ladies and gentlemen. It gives you fame, it gives you fortune, and occasionally it forces you to spend 3 months in Alaska with Steven Seagal. But if you keep your head down, do your job, and remember where you came from, you survive them all. Thank you.